Geopolitics and Empire is joined by Josh Friedman, who's an American journalist traveling the world producing reports on international news and geopolitics. You can find him all over the place at freemanpost.com, nomadicjournalism.com, over at We Are Change, on Twitter at Freeman Reporter, on YouTube at Josh Friedman FMP. Good to have you on Geopolitics and Empire, Josh.
Thank you, Hervoya. Very nice to join you.
Yeah, I've been following your work for a while with We Are Change and your independent work, and you're all over the place. But you've been busy traveling everywhere, U.S., Ukraine, I think, Turkey. Has it been difficult traveling in the age of the crown virus?
I was going to say less so over the past couple years, or maybe at this point it's been a few years. Less so over the past 2-3 years have I been traveling everywhere. But yeah, there have been a lot of difficulties, not as much in recent weeks, although maybe we'll touch a bit on inflation. The prices of air travel and I mean just about everything are skyrocketing. So that's been the latest wrinkle. But yeah, during peak COVID restrictions, travel was not nearly as fun as it had been for me in years past. Lots of difficulties, but I managed.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, one of the first things I wanted to ask you about was your coverage of Bilderberg. I think it was a few months ago. And I've been following Bilderberg reports, as have many, for over a decade now. And during the pandemic, Bilderberg didn't meet. But then earlier this year, in 2022, out of the blue, they got together, I think, in Washington. And I believe you were there. I saw a clip with you and Max Blumenthal, among perhaps a few others, but I didn't really see many in the independent media covering it. It was kind of sad to see little coverage of Bilderberg this year, but how did you find out? How many folks like you were on the ground there, and sort of what's your takeaway of what happened in Bilderberg?
A message from our sponsors. It seems we may be headed for the 1930s all over again. Financial collapse, tyranny, and world war. I've already secured multiple passports, offshore accounts, safe havens, and escaped to the sunnier shores of Mexico. My friend Mikkel Thorup of the Expat Money Show is hosting the Expat Money Summit with 30-plus experts that'll help you reclaim freedom in this fourth turning by moving your life and wealth offshore. Themes include securing your Plan B bug-out location, banking offshore, reducing your tax burden legally, storing precious metals, getting another passport, and more. Protect yourself and secure a new life abroad. Register now for free at expatmoneysummit.com, or don't, and enjoy surviving on insect protein while stuck in the metaverse. And don't forget to fund Geopolitics and Empire. You can leave a donation, except on Patreon or PayPal, which have banned us, book a consultation, or become a member.
Well, like you said, there weren't so many there covering it, and to most people, it did totally come out of the blue. Bilderberg had previously last met in 2019 in Switzerland. Then they took off 2020 and 2021. I was very confident that they were going to meet this year. However, no one, myself included, did any proper sleuthing. And somehow Bilderberg this year managed to announce that they were meeting in Washington, D.C. after the conference had already started. So even in recent years, when things have been a bit more secretive than in the past, they had been announcing publicly via their press release and whatnot, give or take 48 hours in advance, which for most people is not enough time to get there, but for some people it is. But this time they kept things so hush-hush that they announced that the meeting was starting, I believe, on Thursday afternoon. The meetings are usually Thursday through Sunday, or Sunday's travel days, Thursday through Saturday, however you want to describe it. So they announced it on Thursday afternoon after presumably most participants had already arrived. It was an extremely late announcement. That, coupled with the fact that many people are dealing with COVID restrictions, or some were dealing with COVID restrictions, some couldn't even get there, who wanted to get there, and travel is just more complicated nowadays. So what ended up happening, as you alluded to, was quite bizarre. They met not in their usual DC location, which is just outside of DC in Chantilly, Virginia, but this time they met right in the heart of DC, right at the National Mall, right beside the National Mall, in a direct line to the Capitol. It was the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. There was a cover story at the hotel as well. Maybe you want to get into that, maybe not. And there was almost no one there on the outside except the usuals, the security, the police, the blacked out vehicles. Like you said, Max Blumenthal showed up briefly, maybe a couple times briefly. I was there Friday morning through the rest of the conference, so Friday morning through Sunday afternoon. And for most of the time that I was there, I was one of 2 or 3 observers on the outside. In fact, for the first day, very, very briefly, a photojournalist showed up on a particular assignment. He left, and other than him, I didn't see anyone else out there. There was no one else standing out there reporting on it with me on the first day, and then on the second day and third day, at some points there'd be 2 people, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. So considering that it was right in the middle of DC and how many world leaders or very influential people were gathered there on the inside, it was a truly bizarre sight.
You know, one view that I've had regarding Bilderberg is that it seems Bilderberg still retains an important logistical function or hub, but that it has been overshadowed by the World Economic Forum, because it seems they're really going operational with many aspects of their plans. How do you sort of view Bilderberg's importance now in light of what we're seeing with the Great Reset and Cobra Commander Klaus Schwab and Davos and all of this?
Well, I think what you're describing has a lot to do with the blowback from the announcement of the Great Reset plans. If they even are formal plans still at this point. I don't follow the World Economic Forum, or at least I don't cover them as closely as I do Bilderberg. I've been to some World Economic Forum side event or 2 at a EU conference in the Balkans before, but I've never actually been to Davos. I've been to Bilderberg in Switzerland though. But over the past couple years, the World Economic Forum has garnered so much attention, and largely negative attention, because it's been announced in one way or another that there's an agenda for people to own nothing and be happy. And that caused, understandably, a lot of people to flip out. And suddenly the World Economic Forum came under a microscope, and lots of people who view global, or some might call them globalist organizations, with a very negative light, they became enraged, and they started talking all the time about the World Economic Forum. And Bilderberg, you could say because of that, or you could say for other reasons, has been able to maintain more of that privacy or that secrecy that they so enjoy. But even still, they have different functions. There's a lot of crossover in terms of participants and ideology and discussion and format between the two. But at least comparing the Davos event to the annual Bilderberg meeting, but they also function quite differently. So Bilderberg is an off-the-record conference, and Davos every year, which is the main World Economic Forum event, that happens in the public view. I mean, most people aren't going to buy a plane ticket to Switzerland and pay $50 for a sandwich so they could eat lunch there. But the forums or fora are live streams, and there's a much clearer understanding from people like you and I, or at least we have much more ability to monitor what's happening at Davos than what's happening in Bilderberg. And many people still have never even heard of Bilderberg.
And I know you were on the outside there at the Bilderberg meeting, and you're not privy to much information, but I don't know, just being there, were you able to glean, I don't know, any feeling or intuition? Or, they did publish the topics on their website that they, supposedly were discussing. What takeaway do you have from Bilderberg this year? And in the context of everything that's going on globally, sort of what's your feeling of where we're at this juncture in time?
Well, standing on the outside, you always get some sort of feeling, some sort of intuition. There are often some wild things that happen. Like myself and others have gotten some pretty rough treatment from police in the past. That was not the case this year. I admit, even though I was expecting the conference to take place, I was caught off guard. I could have done more to prepare this year, even though I got there probably, I guess, faster than anyone. But I've had better years journalistically, in that there have been other years where I've been able to glean a lot more strong information. So after the 2019 event, there was information that came out both in the way of a participant actually publishing it, which was a bit unexpected, although in my opinion, it was actually in line with their rules. They just shun upon that. But then also I was able to conduct some off-the-record interviews. So I had a much better understanding of what was discussed on the inside the last time in 2019. Not so this year. However, this year, like you said, in the context of Ukraine and world events, there are things that you can glean. This year, as has been the case quite often in recent years, Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO chief, was there. This year, also, Sanna Marin, the Finnish prime minister, was there. Not only did they both attend, they actually met with one another. This was prior to Finland's Sweden's bids formally going through and them joining NATO. So at this point, it was still in the process, and Turkey had their reservations about it, so it was up in the air. And lo and behold, during the Bilderberg meeting, Stoltenberg tweeted out a photo of him meeting with Sanna Marin at the conference. You could tell exactly where it was. Well, later on, I went into the hotel and I could tell exactly where it was. It was at the Hotel Garden. And he flat out tweeted that they were discussing Finland and Sweden's bid to join NATO, which was a bit odd because the Bilderberg organizers claim and state publicly that everyone is there in private capacity, that they're not there in their former roles. If they're NATO chief, they're not there as NATO chief. They're just there as Jens Stoltenberg. They're not there as the prime minister of Finland. They're there as Sanna Marin, although quite often the governments put out information contradicting that, but that's a bit of a tangent. So there are obviously important NATO discussions taking place there. There's obviously stuff with regard to Ukraine being discussed there. There were two, I don't believe I ever saw them, but there were two Ukrainian officials who were on the attendance list. One was the head of Naftogaz, and the other was the Ukrainian ambassador to the US. So that is unusual. Once in a while, someone from outside of the general Western Atlanticist countries gets invited, but it's not too often. And this year, that obviously happened in the context of the events in Ukraine. So there were a lot of interesting things that appeared on the topics list. You can never know for sure if what they're discussing is in line with the topics list, but this year it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if the discussions that took place inside the meeting were very similar to what's on the topics list. And yeah, you could infer from that there's a lot of concern. At least that would be my inference, that a lot of the institutions and the global frameworks that have been developed by people who attend a lot of conferences like this and to rub shoulders with people who are at Bilderberg and Davos, et cetera, that they're probably concerned about how things are going for them.
You mentioned Ukraine, and I believe looking at your YouTube channel, you were in Ukraine. How was that? What's the view of people on the ground, and sort of what's your view on the situation? It seems like we're in a war of attrition, and this is not ending anytime soon. So, your thoughts on the situation in Ukraine?
when I was there, it was a much different situation. I would not describe it as a war of attrition at that point. I'd love to go back. I was there I've been there many times, but since the war started, I was only there once, and it was in early to mid-March. And that was right before the Russians pulled out of the outskirts of Kiev and changed up their whole battle strategy. So things were much different, and they really looked totally different to me, because on my final day of reporting near the action, I was in Kiev, on the outskirts of Kiev, trying to get into Irpin, trying to get back into Irpin, where I'd been the previous day reporting. And that was right when the first American journalist, was killed. And I actually saw his body on the side of the road. Wasn't the most pleasant sight, very sad to see. And I was stopped by Ukrainian soldiers from going any farther and going back into Irpin, because they said the fighting had spread basically just a lot onto that road that leads from Kiev to Irpin. And so because of those images and what was happening that day, I ended up leaving Kiev with the thought in my mind, like, the battle for Kiev is raging on, and like the Russians might flat out storm the city. It seemed to be that that was on the verge of happening. So when I was there and where things are now, things are much different. But I would say that if the Russians took a big L. It was, in the initial rounds, the fight in the beginning of the war, that they definitely did a lot of damage on the outskirts of Kiev. I was also I was in Irpin, one of those communities on the outskirts of Kiev that saw a lot of fighting. I'm drawing a blank on it, but I was there too, and refugees were flowing out of there, bodies were flowing out of there. I've seen bodies being carried out on stretchers right and left. Like, some of them were dead, some of them were alive. So, it's not like the Russians didn't try to do anything there. It seemed to me like they were full on gunning for Kiev, at least just from my perspective, being there on the ground, and they didn't get it, and they had to retreat and go about a new strategy. And I'm not there in Donbass. I'd like to go back. Maybe I go back soon. So it's a little hard. It's a little hard for me to say or to give you any firsthand perspective on where things are now. But it seems like Ukraine wins in some areas, Russia wins in some areas. Maybe the broader picture that doesn't look so good for Russia, because they started the war. In my mind, they are the invaders. So it looked at the beginning like they were trying to take the capital, trying to replace the government. So maybe in the broader picture, things don't look so great for Russia. But I know Ukraine's suffering huge losses in Donbass, and incrementally is losing territory. So I guess here we are. Who knows how long it's going to go on?
I think it was just reported a few days ago that Russia. It was reported that a Russian diplomat was saying that they do want regime change and get rid of Zelensky. I met a young person the other day from Ukraine working here in Croatia, and they told me that, and they're from Kiev, and they said, at least for now, like, the situation in Kiev is largely normal. Like, their family is back in Kiev, and people go about their lives normally. So it's kind of, as you say, maybe Kiev for now has just kind of been left alone, and at least there in that bubble, things are going on as usual. You mentioned refugees, and another topic that you've covered. I think you've been on the border down in my other home of Mexico. I'm a proud Mexican citizen, and I think this is another issue related to globalism from my perspective, migration, because. I've been reading that the CBP, Custom and Border Patrol, has been having 250,000 encounters with migrants monthly, and I sort of view the globalist ideology being they sort of want a multicultural Babylonian type system where they want to break down local and national identity, like Mexican identity, American identity, the individual European identities, because they want to form, pave the way for a supranational identity in the form of regional unions like the EU, like the North American Union. So, apart from poverty and crime in Latin America that's pushing people to go up north, I also think the globalists are egging on this migration to flood the U.S. And you've been down, I think, also on the Guatemala-Mexico border. What did you see, and what's sort of your takeaway, regarding your time there?
It's kind of interesting you're asking me about those borders, because historically I've spent far more time on Balkan borders covering the migrant crisis in southeastern Europe and all over Europe. But with regard to what you're bringing up about migration, I guess in North America and globally with globalism, I tend to view globalism as the integration of markets, governments, and countries. So the immigration issue is definitely huge in that. There's definitely an element of integrating countries into larger global structures, supranational structures, as you're saying, and migration plays big into that. I did not time my North American migrant coverage so well. So several years back, I was in a bunch of hotspots in the Balkans right after September 2015, I think it was August 2015, when then German Chancellor Angela Merkel infamously announced refugees welcome. I was in the Balkans back then, and I went to a bunch of hotspots. Idomeni was one of the more infamous ones on the Greek-Macedonian border, but I went all over covering the migrant crisis, and I saw a lot more action there than I did on the U.S.-Mexican border at Tijuana, basically in Tijuana, and the Guatemalan-Mexican border down along the Suchate River. I went to those spots during COVID in 2020 a couple times. Well, the first time was right before the lockdown. So I caught the tail end of a migrant caravan that was going up through Guatemala and into Mexico, and some made it into Mexico, some were stopped. What happened was then Trump was president, and Trump basically pressured AMLO into doing something about the issue. And what AMLO did was he sent the National Guard down to the Guatemalan border and lined them up along the river. And I got lots of shots of that both times that I was there. And those guys gave a beating to the migrants that they found and the migrants that they caught. And there were other Mexican officials spread out throughout southern Mexico tracking down migrants. I did some reporting on that back when Trump was president. So since Biden's taken over, I have not been on any of the, well, I mean, I guess there's one main border to report on in in North America right now with regard to the migrant situation. That's the U.S.-Mexico border. And I haven't been back there since Biden took office. But what I'm seeing from photos and videos and what I'm hearing, it just seems like a huge free-for-all. It seems a bit reminiscent of what I saw in the Balkans in the fall of 2015 and early 2016, when any given day there could be thousands of people just by bus, by train, by foot, crossing border after border, making their way up through Greece, up through the Balkans into Central Europe. I guess maybe it's not quite to that extent. I remember when the countries in southeastern Europe, and probably Greece even more so, were literally just putting migrants on public buses and trains and just sending them to the next country as they made their way to Germany, Sweden, wherever, largely Germany. I I guess it hasn't gotten to that point. I guess there isn't that much globalism in North America right now, but it seems like there's a lot of it.
I do recall reading the news some years ago, at least here in Croatia, that the Croatian authorities, police, were very strict about not letting migrants into Croatia. In any case, I think most of them just go up north to France and Germany and these other more wealthier nations. In that regard, I kind of view my country, my other country of Croatia, as the Mexico of the United States of Europe. And so in any case, they all go up north, just like for Mexico, they go up to the U.S. And you tweeted recently that you're...
Sorry to cut you off. Maybe the Balkans as a whole would be the Mexico of Europe, because I remember the main routes, and Croatia was pretty much never on the main route. But then some things would pop up, like Orban would build the fence at the border, and then migrants would start veering off on different routes, like through Croatia.
Yeah, I'd agree. When I lived in Geneva in Switzerland, I met a local barista, Serbian, and she was saying, us from the Balkans, the Croats, Serbs, Bosnians, we are the Mexicans of Switzerland, because we do all these sorts of jobs that the Swiss don't want to do, which is funny. I don't have any problem with that. But you're in Turkey. I hope you're enjoying the Turkish coffee and baklava. I love that stuff. And you tweeted that you said it doesn't feel too different than pre-COVID. I mean, in many places now, I still can't believe in Mexico people are wearing masks, but here in Croatia, I haven't seen a mask. My biggest fear is sort of this medical tyranny and this social credit system, basically the vaccine passport, which I view as a social credit system where if you're not vaxxed or you don't have this passport, in many countries or different parts of the world, you are not allowed to go into a supermarket, travel, work. It's like the Chinese, dystopian totalitarian system. Do you think they're gonna, and we're hearing rumblings now of monkeypox and polio and masks coming back in some jurisdictions. Do you think they're gonna try to lock us down again this fall or winter? And any thoughts on the these digital control systems like the vaccine passport and social credit system?
Sorry, I've got a dog walking in here and sneezing. That tweet was from Sofia, I believe. Sofia, Bulgaria. I think I tweeted out.
Okay.
I think I tweeted out a photo of Sofia in the city center, and I was saying it wasn't feeling too differently. I was just in Bulgaria for 5 days or so, and I could talk about that. But I've spent a lot more time in Turkey than in Bulgaria over the past few years, although I used to live in Bulgaria. But I could speak far more to the COVID situation in Turkey, although I guess I've now gotten a refresher on it in Bulgaria. There are still some masks in Bulgaria, but not many. And I think Bulgaria is pretty well known for being one of the more anti-vax hesitant countries in all of Europe, definitely in the EU. I think it's known as the most in the EU. Turkey has been all over the place with COVID. Right now, there are no COVID restrictions in Turkey, but I've experienced the full spectrum, which for me hasn't been the worst because I'm basically a foreigner treated as a tourist here. But I was here I was in Istanbul during multiple lockdowns, and there was one lockdown last year during Ramadan where they really shut down the city. I'm not so sure about countrywide. I think it was pretty much countrywide, but Istanbul turned into a ghost town. And if you've got a city of 20 million people and you're walking around and you see like 2 or 3 people on the street after walking for 3 minutes, yeah, there's something wrong. And that couple, so I mean, all the pressure put on businesses and people's ability to earn a living, coupled with the massive inflation that was already taking place in Turkey. People around the world have gotten a big dose of inflation over the past couple of years, but Turks have been getting many doses of inflation basically for the past decade. And so economically things have gotten a lot worse in Turkey. Now, arguably, in some ways, things have bounced back a lot. Property prices spiked way up. Turkey's been having a lot of success with its investment migration programs. Lots of Russians pouring in, buying real estate. Lots of people from the Gulf and other Arab countries pouring in, buying real estate. Actually, the immigration issue is very complex in Turkey also. You were asking me about COVID, but there's all kinds of dynamics to the political and economic situation in Turkey. But yeah, there's just been Turkey's at some point multiple times had no COVID restrictions, and then there are other times where there are strict lockdowns and practically no one on the street, almost all businesses shut down, big vaccination drives. So Turkey's been all over the place when it comes to COVID.
And you feel that we will maintain sort of this freedom to travel, or I mean, do you have a feeling maybe you're seeing more vaccination drives or more people wearing masks or governments asking people to wear masks? Do you think for now we're okay, or what's your feeling that they might bring back more restrictions soon?
In early 2020, when COVID basically first became a thing, I remember back when there were just a few articles here and there about some coronavirus in China, but several months later, a couple months after that, whenever it was, when people really started talking about COVID and becoming aware of the situation, I said, or I thought to myself, well, governments aren't just going to go totally crazy and shut the world down. And I was essentially wrong. So I've learned from that mistake. And personally speaking, now I try to diversify my living situation, not have all my eggs in one basket. I bounce around between Zanzibar, between Istanbul, Los Angeles for family reasons, and other places. So I try to have a setup in my life so that if some country shuts things down, some government shuts things down, I can go elsewhere. That's just me personally speaking. But as far as like a gut inclination as to what governments are going to do, well, I mean, now there's talk about monkeypox. Canada, I think, is already bringing back more COVID travel restrictions. I don't know if they ever let up with any kind of restrictions in Canada. I get the impression that certain countries like Bulgaria, for instance, I don't think they want to go back. I don't think the population there is keen on going back to some hardcore COVID tyranny, as you might say it. But then again, I still do see some people walking around with masks on in Bulgaria. So I wouldn't put it past any country to go back to lockdowns, go to try vaccine passports again, or whatever kind of new regulation comes to mind. And maybe it's because COVID, maybe it's because monkeypox, maybe it's because something else that comes to mind. It's pretty hard to predict, but the general sense that I get is that beware of winter, or beware of northern winter, because someone's going to get sick with something. Some virus is going to go around. Something's going to happen in terms of public health, and there may be some collective freakout. So I just try to be able to be as flexible and as mobile as possible.
Yeah, I feel the same way as you. I have planted multiple flags and can escape to a few different places if I have to or need to. And the feeling is the same here in Croatia. People are just fed up. They don't believe any of this. But then the other factor, as you say, I could see it happening where the government just doesn't care and they slam the boot down on everyone's face and just say lockdown again. But I have heard people here tell me that there's enough people. People might start exploding. Like they might just pots and go with their pots and pans and just not. We might see greater pushback. And I also agree with you that in the winter, be aware of the winter. I guess one of my last questions would be, because you're very involved in this journalism and independent media. How do you see the state of podcasting, journalism, independent media today? Are we having an impact? And for people who want to get more into this sort of work, what advice might you have?
Going back to the previous topic, maybe one last caveat would be that you named Croatia, I named Bulgaria. Well, both Bulgaria and Croatia are in the EU, and countries like that are probably going to face pressure if there's some collective sentiment in the EU that you need to go back to serious COVID restrictions, lockdowns, or whatever. Even if the people of Bulgaria don't want it, even the people of Croatia don't want it, it's probably risky being anywhere in the EU if that kind of political tide returns. But as far as state of journalism and podcasting, I think nowadays I worry much less about how much of an effect people are having, even to some extent how much of an effect I'm having, and I just try to go about doing my thing. Journalism is as much a passion for me as it is a work or a career path. So if I continue to be able to travel to Ukraine, report on the war there, travel to various borders around the world, cover the migrant crisis, go to Bilderberg every year, report on it, do that kind of stuff that I love doing, that I'm passionate about, then I'm happy. If it makes a difference, great. I know following this Bilderberg, there were lots of people who were contacting me, more so than in years past, even when some bizarre things happened to me at Bilderberg. So I guess I can speak from some experience, that maybe I guess people are taking note of some of the work I do. I know working with the bigger names like Luke Brodowski, for instance, who I do a lot of work for, more so on the business side than on the reporting side. But yeah, I mean, he was on that he still is quite often on the Timcast IRL, the Tim Pool's podcast. That thing has grown huge. They have billboards advertising it on Times Square. So maybe that answers your question about podcasting and alternative media and journalism nowadays.
Yeah. Any then other thought or final thoughts for us?
Well, it's interesting weaving together topics like globalism and Davos and Bilderberg with some of the more standard boots on the ground reporting that I do, like going to the Guatemala-Mexican border, going around the Balkans, covering the migrant crisis. And it's interesting to hear your take on how those factor into geopolitics and globalism, as you refer to it.
Yeah, as well, I see a lot of these things as connected. And where would be the best places to find you on the internets and support you?
You don't really need to worry about supporting me, but if you find me, that's plenty good for now. Like you said, on YouTube, I'm Josh Friedman, or youtube.com/Josh Friedman FMP. I'm getting increasingly shadow banned. I'm not so sure if you type in my name in Bilderberg, my stuff will even pop up. That's been a recent development. At Freeman Reporter on Twitter, nomadicjournalism.com, freemanpost.com. I'm around. You can find me.
All right. Well, Josh, again, I'll include the links in the description, and thank you for joining me on Geopolitics and Empire.
All right. Thanks a lot. It was fun.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.